You're listening to Worldview on WBEZ. I'm Jerome McDonnell. As waves of revolts across North Africa bring under scrutiny U.S. support for dictators for the sake of stability, many argue that not enough attention is being paid to other parts of Africa. Observers argue that in other parts of the continent, U.S. support for so-called strongman regimes have produced bad policy outcomes and weakened U.S. influence in the region. Brian Endless is a senior advisor to the Hotel Rwanda Rudasingwa Foundation and a political science professor at Loyola University. And Theogene Rudasingwa was chief of staff to Rwanda's President Paul Kagame, and he now lives in exile in the United States. Rudasingwa believes the so-called Rwandan miracle is a myth. He brings a rare insider's glimpse into the Kagame regime. And Theogene Rudasingwa left the regime because of a crisis of conscience.
The circumstances of my departure took place over a period of time, and certainly I had realized that I could no longer be part of President Kagame's government. So my departure was more or less the kind of departure that we have increasingly seen with other people falling out with President Kagame. Having worked with him for almost 15 years, I realized that we could no longer be compatible simply because I was like leading a double life. There was Dr. Rudasingwa, who was Kagame's chief of staff, who definitely in that position had to try and articulate what the regime wanted. And in most cases, of course, there was a lot of deception on what was going on in Rwanda. So that was part of me. But the other part of me was the one that is true to myself, who wants to be the person who speaks truth and who wants to lead a normal life. And I could see that those two parts of me could no longer be reconciled within me. So I was a guy at war with myself.
What did you have to lie to yourself about?
Just to give two examples to demonstrate the kind of life that somebody like me led. From 96 to 99, I was also Rwanda's ambassador to United States. And if you might recall, in the 90s, 96 to 97, Rwanda ventured into the Democratic Republic of Congo. And once Kagame ordered Rwandan troops into Congo, he told the world that actually we're not in the Congo. And so as an ambassador, my job was to go to the State Department and in the public, in my meetings with think tanks in Washington, D.C., to say absolutely Rwanda has no troops in the Congo.
Did those people believe you, or did they think, oh, this guy's the government of Rwanda, he's full of cheese?
I think, unfortunately, especially for the United States, the people I was talking to knew that genuinely were in the Congo. But I think we had more or less perfected the art of intimidating the international community into silence every time they raised anything about Rwanda, because we would always say, where were you in 1994? You never prevented genocide. You never stopped genocide. So what right do you have to comment on issues about Rwanda? So another example I would give, the life of deception on behalf of President Kagame was, since 94, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the international community, always in a timid fashion, but they always raise the issue of human abuses by the government. And for me, who was at the apex of that establishment, I always had to assemble people because we had to respond to charges by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. Really, we knew how to spin the doctor. Once again, would simply challenge Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, where were you in 1994? And I knew that some of the things that these organizations were saying were actually true. And it's part of that process of deception that is a characteristic of Kagame's regime. And so this life of deception on the one hand, and my search for living a physician's life, or at least the normal life of an ordinary citizen in Rwanda. And I think these two personalities were crashing, and I think I could no longer sustain it.
Now, a lot of the accusations that Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch were making were contained in a UN report that was recently released in the fall, in October. And the accusations would, I imagine, implicate you in crimes when the RPF came back in to Rwanda and took over in Rwanda. It committed crimes, massacres of women and children things that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International were concerned about all these years. What do you want to see happen there? I mean, you would face criminal charges if these things were pursued.
Probably not me personally, because my work over the years has not really been military as such. I was never in the Congo during the years in the 90s. I was the Secretary General of the RPF or the Ambassador to the United States. I returned to Rwanda in 1999, and I was Kagame's Chief of Staff from 2000 to 2004. But having said that, there's also the collective responsibility. I was part of this government which is being accused of having committed some of these crimes. And I have said on my part that I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions that Rwandans would ask or the international community would ask with regard to accountability about these crimes. But I've also said that it would be very interesting also to see whether Kagame would answer that question in this fashion, because there is a lot of accounting that President Kagame has to do. And I think the best way to approach issues of atrocity, issues of human rights abuses, issues of crimes against humanity, or war crimes, or even acts of genocide, the best way to approach it, especially with regard to Rwanda, has to proceed from the basis of truth-telling. Because until we come to grips with our own past and be able to see each other in the face and tell the truth about what happened to us, and therefore how to proceed from there, it will be very, very difficult for Rwanda to hear and to attain reconciliation.
Well, what are some of the things that you thought were true? What kind of things and circumstances were these?
The issues of human rights in general, though I would not say I was there to witness these crimes being committed, but generally speaking, like the people who've died since 1994, like the issues of even members of RPF who've been killed, supposedly on Kagame's orders, some of these things, even within the RPF ranks, people knew that this is exactly what happened. So there was that public secrets, if we can call them that, something that was known within the RPF, but which outside we always wanted to pretend that nothing happened in Rwanda.